At 7:42 on a Tuesday morning, 6 days after she buried her husband, a yellow excavator put its steel arm through the front wall of Ngozi Adeyemi's house while she was still inside boiling water for her children's tea. The wall did not crack the way walls crack in films. It folded, slow and almost gentle, a sheet of concrete bowing inward, and then the dust came in a hot gray breath that filled her mouth and turned the morning white. She heard her youngest scream from the back room. She heard the kettle hit the floor and the water hiss across the tiles. She did not scream. She walked through the powder with her arms out, found both children by the sound of their crying, and pulled them out the broken doorway into the open compound where 40 strangers in safety vests were already standing, waiting, holding clipboards. A man in a clean cream agbada stood by a black Prado at the gate, watching her cough in the dust, and he did not look away. He looked at her the way a man looks at a number he has already finished writing down. What Ngozi did not know, as she stood barefoot in the rubble of the only home her husband had ever owned, was that the man at the gate had just made the single greatest mistake of his life, and that the proof of it was sitting in a brown envelope she had not yet opened. To understand how a widow in Surulere brought down one of the biggest developers in Lagos, you have to go back to before the dust, before the funeral, to a small house on a quiet street, and a man who used to wake before the sun. His name was Ngozi Adeyemi, and he was a secondary school geography teacher who had saved for 19 years to buy the plot of land on Adekunle Close. He was not a rich man. He wore the same 3 shirts in rotation and mended his own shoes with a needle he kept in a matchbox. But he understood one thing the way some men understand music. He understood land. He understood that in Lagos, paper is the difference between a home and a memory. So when he finally bought the plot in 2006, he did not stop at the receipt. He registered the deed of assignment. He paid for a certificate of occupancy. He hired a licensed surveyor to walk the boundary with a chain and a theodolite and draw the survey plan. And on that plan, at the rear corner of the property, the surveyor marked a single tree, an old mango tree that had been there longer than the street had a name. Emeka used to stand under that mango tree in the evenings with a cup of tea going cold in his hand and tell his daughter that a man who keeps his papers can never be made a stranger on his own ground. He said it so often it stopped being advice and became something closer to a prayer. "Keep the papers," he told her. "The papers remember what people choose to forget." Ngozi met Emeka when she was 24, selling fabric in Balogun Market, and she married him under that same mango tree with 11 guests and a single pot of jollof rice cooked over firewood in the yard. They had 2 children, a girl named Amara, who was now 9, and a boy named Toby, who was now 6. And for 11 years, the 4 of them lived in the small house Emeka built, with his own hands and his careful, patient papers. Then, in the space of 1 month, a cough became a fever. The fever became a hospital ward, and Ngozi Adeyemi died at 51 of a sickness the doctors named too late. Ngozi buried him on a Wednesday in the rain. She wore black ankara and did not weep at the graveside because Amara was holding her hand and Toby was watching her face to learn how to feel, and she would not teach her children that the world had won. She came home from the funeral, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at the brown envelope Emeka had kept in a biscuit tin under the bed for as long as she had known him. The land documents. She did not open it that night. She put it back in the tin and pushed the tin back under the bed. She did not yet know that someone had already decided the land was theirs. The man at the gate was named Chief Basharan Okafor, and in the property pages of the Lagos newspapers, He was a success story. He was 46 years old, the chairman of Okafor Continental Developments, and he had built 4 shopping complexes and a gated estate on the mainland with the kind of speed that makes other men nervous. He wore tailored agbada, the color of expensive cream. He drove a fleet of black Prados, and he gave generous donations to 2 churches and 1 university, his name carved into a marble plaque at the gate of each. He was, by every public measure, a respectable man. He did not break into homes at night with thugs and machetes. He did something far cleaner and far more frightening. He went to the land registry. Chief Okafor had been buying up plots on Adekunle Close for 2 years, assembling them quietly, the way a careful man assembles a hand of cards, because he intended to build a luxury tower of 40 floors on the combined land and sell the apartments for sums that would never be spoken aloud to the people he displaced. He had bought every plot on the close but one. The one he could not buy was the small house belonging to a stubborn geography teacher who refused 3 separate times to sell, and who told Okafor's agent at the gate that some things are not for sale because they are not yours to price. So Chief Okafor waited. He was a patient man, the way a crocodile is patient. And when he read in a community bulletin that Ngozi Adeyemi had died, he did not send condolences or a wreath. He sent his lawyers to the registry with a new set of documents, beautifully typed, properly stamped, claiming that the late Mr. Adeyemi had sold the plot to Okafor Continental Developments 14 months earlier, and that the title had already lawfully passed. The documents were forged, but they were neat, and in a city of millions, and a registry drowning in paper, neat is often enough. He filed the papers on a Friday. He sent the demolition crew the following Tuesday. He did not even wait for the 7th day of mourning to pass. This was the calculation Chief Okafor made, and it was the calculation of a man who had never once been wrong about what money could erase. A grieving widow with 2 children and no husband would not have the strength, the knowledge, or the money to fight a chief with 4 shopping complexes and a wall of lawyers in dark suits. She would cry, she would beg, she would be moved, and within a year, the tower would rise over the place where the mango tree used to stand, and no one in Lagos would remember that a family had ever lived there at all. He was right about almost everything. He was right that she had no money. He was right that she had no lawyer. He was right that she was alone. He was wrong about exactly one thing, and it was the only thing that mattered. He did not know about the envelope. On the morning of the demolition, Ngozi stood in the compound, holding her children, while a man with a clipboard read out a notice she could not fully hear over the engine of the excavator. She caught only fragments. Lawful possession, prior sale, trespass, vacate the premises. She looked at the man in the cream agbada by the gate, and she said nothing, because there was nothing yet to say. She did not throw herself on the ground. She did not curse him or claw at the workers. She did one thing only. As the crew moved toward the back of the house, toward the bedrooms, she walked calmly past them, through the falling dust, stepped over the fallen kettle and the spreading water, reached under the broken frame of her own bed, and pulled out the dented biscuit tin. She held it against her chest with both arms, the way a woman holds the last warm thing in a cold house, and she walked back out into the light. One of the workers, a young man no older than 22, with a thin face and careful eyes, watched her do this. He watched a barefoot widow walk back into a collapsing house, not for money, not for jewelry, but for a rusted tin she shielded with her whole body from a chief who could buy the entire street. And something in the way she held it made him slow his hands and look down. He would remember the tin. He did not know why, but he would remember it. And one day, that memory would matter more than he could have guessed. Ngozi took her children and the tin and the clothes on their backs, and she walked out of Adekunle Close as the excavator began on the roof, and the timbers came down behind her, with a sound like a chest caving in. She had 2,000 naira knotted in the corner of her wrapper, and nowhere to go. She had been a homeowner at sunrise. By noon, she was a woman sitting on a wooden bench outside a shuttered shop with 2 hungry children and a biscuit tin, watching strangers walk past as if she were a smudge on the day. This is the part of the story where the world expects the woman to disappear, to dissolve into the great gray crowd of the wronged and the forgotten. She did not disappear. Where Ngozi went was Bulldozed Market, because the market was the only place in Lagos that had ever treated her as a person with a name. Before she married, she had sold Ankara there for 6 years, and the women of the fabric line do not forget a daughter. When she walked in with her children and the dust still gray in her hair, an older trader named Mama Risi, who had sold lace from the same stall for 30 years and had buried a husband and a son of her own, took one long look at her face and did not ask a single question. She cleared a space behind her stall, set down a bench, sent a small boy running for rice and stew, and put the children to sleep on folded bales of fabric, while Ngozi finally let her hands shake. Mama Risi was a wide, slow-moving woman with gray hair tucked under a green headscarf and a voice like a closing gate, and she had opened her stall to more broken people than she could count on both hands. She did not offer pity, because pity is a thin soup. She offered a corner and a question. When Ngozi could finally speak, Mama Risi asked her only this: "Child, did your husband keep his papers?" And Ngozi, who had not yet opened the tin, who had been carrying it for 2 days like a stone she was afraid to look at, set it on the wooden table between them and pried open the lid with her thumbnail. Inside was the brown envelope, soft and worn at the corners, from 19 years of a careful man's hands. She opened it under the bare bulb of the stall, while the market roared and bargained and lived all around them, and she laid the papers out one by one on the cloth: the deed of assignment, the receipt, the original certificate of occupancy with the state seal pressed into the corner and the file number printed across the top, and folded beneath them the surveyor's plan, the boundary drawn in faded blue ink, and at the rear corner, in a small, careful hand, 3 words: existing mango tree. Mama Risi put on her reading glasses and looked at the papers for a long time, turning each one toward the light. Then she said 5 words that changed the direction of everything. She said, "Then the land is yours." If this story is reaching you the way I think it is, stay with me, because what this woman did next with one worn envelope is the part the chief never saw coming. Knowing you own something and proving it are 2 different countries, and between them lies a registry, a courtroom, and a man with more money than mercy. Mama Risi knew this in her bones. She had watched market women lose land before, not because they were wrong, but because they were poor and tired, and could not afford the long fight, and the men who took it knew exactly how long a poor woman could hold out. So she did not send Ngozi to a courthouse to cry on the steps. She sent her to the one person in Lagos she trusted with paper. His name was Tunde Bello, and he was a young lawyer of 29 who ran a small practice from 2 cramped rooms above a chemist's shop and took cases the big firms would not touch because there was no money in them, only justice, which pays no rent. Mama Risi had once quietly lent his mother the money to finish his school fees in his final year. And Tundabello had never forgotten it, the way a certain kind of man never forgets the hand that pulled him up. When Mama Risi sent word that a widow needed help, he did not send a junior. He came to the market himself, in a shirt that needed ironing, carrying a worn leather folder and a quiet, stubborn patience. He spread Ngozi's documents across the fabric table and read them the way a doctor reads an X-ray, slowly, missing nothing. He checked the state seal on the certificate of occupancy. He checked the file number against his memory of how the registry coded them. He checked the surveyor's stamp and the registration date in the corner. And then he asked Ngozi a question that seemed, at the time, strange and small. He asked, "When did your husband buy this land?" And she told him, 2006. Tundabello went very still, the way a hunter goes still when he hears the bush move. Because he had already heard, through the lawyer's grapevine, what Chief Okafor's people were claiming, and the forged documents Okafor had filed at the registry stated that Ngozi Adeyemi had bought the plot in 2009 and sold it to Okafor Continental in 2022. But Emeka's genuine certificate of occupancy was dated 2006, and it carried a file number the registry itself had recorded 16 years earlier, long before Okafor's forger ever sat down to invent a history. The lie did not match the ledger. The neat new papers contradicted the old ones the government had kept all along. Chief Okafor, in his hurry to seem thorough, had built his forgery on a date that the registry's own dusty records could disprove with a single page. He had been so certain that no one would ever check, so certain that a poor widow would never get this far, that he had not bothered to make the lie fit the history. The very thing he filed to take the land was the thing that would one day take everything from him. But knowing this and proving it in Lagos are, again, two different countries. Tundabello told Ngozi the truth, because he did not believe in feeding clients soft lies. He told her the fight would be long and ugly. He told her that Okafor would have allies inside the system, that registry files went missing in this city, the way slippers go missing at a crowded mosque, that judges could be slow and witnesses could be frightened into silence with a phone call or a brown envelope of a different kind. He told her it might take a full year, maybe more. Then he asked her if she wanted to fight, and Ngozi, who had not cried at her own husband's graveside, looked over at her two children sleeping on folded ankara behind a market stall, their faces calm for the first time in days. And she said one word, "Yes." So they began. And here, the story must do its accounting, because Chief Okafor had told anyone who would listen, his lawyers, the registry, the newspapers, that the widow Adeyemi had no claim, no standing, no proof, that her late husband had sold the land fairly for a good price, and she was simply a confused, grieving woman clinging to a house that was no longer legally hers. That was the lie, and it was a tidy one. This is the ledger. Ngozi Adeyemi paid for that plot over 19 years, in installments recorded in a savings passbook, and Ngozi found at the very bottom of the tin, deposits in a teacher's small disciplined hand, 5,000 naira in 1 month, 8,000 the next, 12,000 after the long vacation when he took on extra lessons, line after line after line, a whole life measured out in saved coins. He paid 240,000 naira in fees to register the deed of assignment. He paid for the certificate of occupancy and its perfection. He paid a licensed surveyor 85,000 naira to walk every corner of the boundary and mark the mango tree on the plan. He paid the customary fee to the community elders and gathered their witness on the day, sharing cola and palm wine under the tree. And 3 of those elders were still alive and still remembered, clear as morning, the day the quiet geography teacher bought the land at the end of Adekun-le-Close. He paid the land use charge every single year and kept every single receipt, banded together with a rubber band that had gone brittle with age. None of this was nothing. All of it was written down somewhere, by someone, kept. Chief Okafor had said the family had contributed nothing and owned nothing. The papers said a careful man had spent half his working life making certain his wife and children could never, ever be made strangers on their own ground. The mango tree on the survey plan was not a small detail. It was a witness with roots that went down into the earth, and you cannot transfer a tree to another state. For 3 weeks, Tunda Bello and Ngozi gathered what they needed while the children slept behind the stall and went to a community school nearby, and Mama Risi fed all of them every single night without once asking to be repaid a single naira. The work was slow, and it was real. They went to the land registry and applied formally for a certified true copy of the original file, and Ngozi sat on a hard wooden bench for 9 hours, across 2 days, holding the tin on her lap, waiting for a clerk to find a folder the system kept insisting it could not locate. They tracked down the surveyor who had drawn the plan, retired now and living with his daughter, his hands unsteady but his memory sharp. And he confirmed his stamp, his signature, and the mango tree he remembered marking himself with his own chain. They took down sworn statements from 2 of the surviving elders, who spoke into Tunde's small recorder about a day long ago, and a teacher who did things properly. And slowly, page by page, statement by statement, the messy, true, lived history of the land assembled itself into something almost as neat as a lie, except that every single line of it had actually happened. Then the counterattack came, and for a while, it looked as if neat would beat true after all. Chief Okafor was not a man who lost quietly, because he had never lost at all. When his lawyers learned that the widow had somehow retained counsel and was formally requesting the original registry file, the one file that would expose the date that did not match, something happened that happens often in Lagos and is almost never proven in a courtroom. The original file went missing. The junior clerk, who had been searching the archive for it, was abruptly transferred to a registry office in a state 400 kilometers away, given 2 days to report. The folder that should have held Ngozi Adeyemi's 2006 certificate of occupancy came back from the strong room empty. A thin manila sleeve with nothing inside but a removal slip. And the removal slip bore no name and no date. And in its place, as if by magic, Okafor's lawyers produced their own certified copies, stamped and clean and freshly signed, telling the registry's brand new version of the story, a 2009 purchase, a 2022 sale, all in order, all correct. For 10 long days, it looked like the chief would win, because the man with money had reached his hand directly into the machine and pulled out the one piece of paper that could ever ruin him. Tunda Bello sat alone in his small office, above the chemist, late into the night, and put his head in his hands, because a case is only ever as strong as the evidence you can physically lay on a table, and the table had just been swept completely clean. Ngozi came to his office that evening to ask about the next step and found him defeated, the lamp low, the folder thin. For the first time in his young career, the lawyer told a client he was not sure they could win. He said the registry copy was gone, simply gone, and that without the government's own internal record confirming the 2006 date, it was now her one worn envelope against the chief's polished, certified, official-looking forgery, and that courts, God forgive them, often believed the cleaner paper over the poorer person. Ngozi listened to all of it without moving. She did not weep. She did not wring her hands. She reached into her bag and took out the biscuit tin, and she set it down on his desk between them, the way Mama Risi had taught her, weeks ago, to set down the truth, plainly, squarely, without begging, and without apology. And then she reminded him, quietly, of something he had forgotten in his despair. The registry's internal file was not the only record of that file number in all the world. Because 19 years before, when Ngozi Adeyemi registered his certificate of occupancy, the registry had not only kept a folder in a strong room. By law, it had also published the grant in the official state gazette, the government's own printed public record, listing the date, the plot, the holder's full name, and the file number, bound into thick volumes that sat untouched in the state archives and in the libraries of 2 universities. Printed, bound, public, untouchable, unbribable. Impossible to quietly transfer to a registry office 400 kilometers away. The chief had emptied the folder. He had never once thought to burn the gazette because he did not know it existed. He could reach the file. He could not reach the year 2006 itself. The turning of the tide did not come with shouting or with drama. It came with a young lawyer and a widow in a clean wrapper, standing at the wooden counter of a dusty government archive on a hot afternoon, while an elderly archivist, a thin man in a worn brown cardigan who had worked in that building for 31 years and disliked rich men on principle, climbed a wooden ladder and pulled down a heavy-bound volume, thick with the year 2006. He carried it to the counter and laid it open. He licked his thumb and turned the brittle, yellowing pages one by one. And there it was, printed by the government's own hand, a decade and a half before Okafor's forger ever sat down to invent a different past. The grant of a certificate of occupancy to one Ngozi Adeyemi. The plot on Adekunle Close. The file number matching the worn original in the biscuit tin exactly, digit for digit, and the date. 2006. The archivist looked at the page for a moment, then looked up at Ngozi over his glasses, and he said quietly that he could certify a true copy then and there, that his official certification carried the full weight of the state behind it, and that no one, in 31 years, had ever once asked him to lose anything. Tunda Bello paid for 3 certified copies. He had each one sealed and signed. And then the second proof arrived, because justice, when it finally turns, often arrives in twos. The young worker from the demolition crew, the one with the thin face and the careful eyes who had watched Ngozi walk back into a falling house to save a rusted tin, came forward of his own will. Mama Risi's wide network of market women, who hear everything in a city that thinks they hear nothing, had found him, and the truth was that he had not slept properly since the morning the wall came down. He gave a written statement. He said the demolition had been ordered and carried out before any court anywhere had ruled on the title. He said the crew had been told to move fast and finish the job before anyone could file a single paper. And he said he had seen the chief himself in his cream agbada, standing at the gate and giving the order to begin on the morning of the 7th day of a widow's mourning. The reckoning, when it finally came, was quiet and it was total. The matter went before a judge of the Lagos State High Court, and Tunda Bello, that young lawyer, in his pressed-at-last shirt, did not raise his voice one single time. He simply laid the documents on the table, the way Ngozi had unknowingly taught him to lay down the truth. He laid down the worn original certificate of occupancy from 2006, soft at its corners. Beside it, he laid the certified gazette copy, the government's own printed public memory, bearing the same file number and the same year. Beside that, the surveyor's plan with the mango tree marked at the corner, and the surveyor's sworn confirmation. Beside that, the recorded testimony of 2 living elders. And then, last of all, he laid down Chief Okafor's own filed documents, the neat and polished forgery, and he asked the court to read just one thing: the date. The chief's papers swore the land had been bought in 2009. The government's own gazette, printed and bound in 2006, proved the land had already lawfully belonged to Ngozi Adeyemi, 3 full years before the chief's lie even claimed the family had bought it. And a man cannot sell in 2009 a thing the government had already recorded as granted in 2006. The forgery did not merely fail. It stood up in open court and accused itself. The judge looked between the 2 dates for a long time, and the courtroom went very quiet, and Chief Basharan Okafor, sitting in his cream egbata in the front row with his expensive lawyers around him, understood, before the judge ever opened his mouth, that the cleanest, neatest document he had ever filed in his life was the rope he had carefully measured for his own neck. The court ruled, plainly and on the record, that the documents filed by Okafor Continental Developments were forgeries, that the purported sale had never taken place, and that title to the land had at all times remained with the estate of the late Ngozi Adeyemi, and now lawfully passed to his widow and his 2 children. But the judge did not stop at the question of the land. Forgery of a land instrument and the filing of false documents to a government registry are serious crimes under Nigerian law, and the conveniently missing file was now itself evidence of a far deeper rot. The judge referred the entire matter to the appropriate authorities for prosecution. Within the year, Chief Basharan Okafor was charged. The case made the very same property pages of the very same newspapers that had once printed his face and called him a success story. And this time, the headline used a colder, shorter word. The 2 registry officials who had made the original file vanish were dismissed from the service and charged alongside him. Okafor Continental Developments, a company built entirely on the speed of a man who believed paper could be rewritten faster than truth could be kept, lost its bank financing the week the news broke, and the half-finished tower 3 streets over stood abandoned, its cranes going still and slowly orange with rust against the bright Lagos sky. The man who had bought every plot on the close, but one lost the company, lost the reputation, and lost the freedom he had so carefully traded his conscience to protect. He was undone, completely and in public, by the single document he had filed to win. And Ngozi Adeyemi did not gloat, not once. When a journalist caught her on the courthouse steps and asked her how it felt to bring down a chief, she said simply that she had not brought down anyone. She said her husband had kept his papers, and the papers had kept their home. That was all. She said 5 words to the gathered cameras, and then she turned and went to collect her children from school. The 5 words were these: "My husband told the truth. Now jump forward 3 years to a bright Saturday in the dry season, on the plot at the end of Adekunle Close, where the dust once rose up and turned to Tuesday morning white. There is no tower. There is a low, handsome building of 2 stories, painted the warm yellow of an old and favorite wrapper, with green shutters and a wide veranda, and a hand-painted sign hung above the gate. And behind it, untouched, still standing exactly where a surveyor once marked it, in faded blue ink at the rear corner of the plot, is the old mango tree, taller now, heavy and dark with fruit. The building is called the Ngozi Adeyemi home, and it does one simple thing. It shelters widows in Lagos who have been pushed off their own land while their grief was still wet on their faces. And it does for each of them exactly what Mama Risi once did for Ngozi behind a fabric stall. It gives them a clean bed and a hot meal. And then it gives them the one thing that actually wins in the end, which is patient, expert help with their papers. Tundabello, no longer working out of 2 cramped rooms above a chemist. He runs a free legal clinic from the ground floor 2 days every week, and he has trained 4 young lawyers to do the same work in his place. Mama Risi, older now and slower in her movements, sits under the mango tree in the cool of the evening and tells the frightened new women what she once told a dust-covered Ngozi, that the land is yours if only you can prove it, and that proving it begins with not being afraid to open the tin. Amara is 12 now and tells everyone, with great seriousness, that she is going to be a lawyer. Toby is 9 and climbs the mango tree until his mother calls him down for supper. And Ngozi Adeyemi, who was a homeowner at sunrise and a woman on a bench by noon, stands beneath that same tree on most mornings with a brown envelope in her hands, a new one, soft already at the corners, because she has taken to keeping the papers of the women who come to her gate, holding their documents safe and certified the way her husband once held his, and telling each of them, one by one, the very thing he told her, under this same tree a whole lifetime ago. Keep the papers. The papers remember what people choose to forget. So here is what I want to leave you with tonight. Here under the old Baobab, where we tell these tales by the fire, you can knock a house down in a single afternoon. You can forge a signature in an hour and stamp it and file it and walk away in a clean cream agbada, believing in your heart that money has finally bought you the past. But you cannot reach back across the years and unwrite a single date that the truth set down long before you ever decided to lie. A polished lie is fast. A kept truth is patient. And patience, it turns out, has roots, like an old mango tree at the corner of a small plot, like a worn brown envelope in a dented biscuit tin, like a quiet man who spent 19 years of his one life making certain that the woman he loved could never be made a stranger on her own ground. So let me ask you this, and tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from tonight. When the bulldozers came for everything she had in the world, do you think Ngozi won in the end because she was lucky, or because someone who loved her had quietly kept the truth somewhere no powerful man could ever reach it? And if it had been your home, your name, your own children standing barefoot in that gray dust, would you have known, in that terrible moment, to turn around and grab the tin? Sit with that question a while, and so the fire burns low under the old Baobab tree. Stay a while and tell me where you watched from.